Morning. We appreciate that. I know you're going to enjoy this. My name is David Fisher. It's my honor to be Vice Chairman for Ron Paul's campaign here in Iowa. I'm also an elected member of the Republican Party of Iowa State Central Committee. That's the 17-member board of directors for the Iowa GOP. And I'm proud to announce that 5 of those 17 have endorsed Ron Paul for president.
Yeah!
Coming in here with a lot of momentum this morning. Yesterday was a big day for Dr. Paul. We did an event over in Davenport and drew a couple hundred people. Down to Burlington, drew more than 200 people. And then last night in Iowa City, 1,200 people showed up. There's a lot of excitement going on here. Listen to the size of these crowds and the energy. There's something going on in this country, something big. I want you all to be a part of that. And the best way we can be a part of it is on January 3rd. That is the set date now of the Iowa caucuses. January 3rd. It's our job as Iowans to go to the caucuses, vote for Ron Paul, send a message to America. Tell them of all these presidential candidates, this is the man that America needs to be listening to. This is the message that America needs to pick up on. And we help reinforce that by turning out at the Iowa caucuses in our neighborhoods on January 3rd, bringing our family, bringing our friends, getting the people to go to the caucus in their precinct, and trying to work in your precinct to get people engaged to turn out for Ron Paul. And I want you to talk to the staff on your way out the door about how you can get more involved in helping elevate Ron Paul's message. I want to have him come on in right now. I'm going to introduce Dr. Ron Paul. He's the champion of the Constitution, the father of the Tea Party, Congressman Ron Paul.
Yeah!
Coming out this morning. It's delightful to see you here. I want to introduce part of my family that came with me today. My wife, Carol, and my 2 granddaughters. It is a delight to come visit with you and talk about some of the important issues that we have to deal with. And as the days go on, it seems like the issues become more important every single day. I've anticipated that we'd have a lot of problems many decades ago, and the problems have arrived. Many times in the past, many who have been involved in concern about our future kept saying, we have to quit spending money because we don't have a right to dump the debt on the next generation or on our grandchildren. You know what? I don't say that so much anymore because I think it's here. I think the penalty is here because now we're starting to pay for our extravagant living and living beyond our means. And it's been going on not just a year or two. This administration, from my viewpoint, has been a bit of a disaster. But we've had some ideas and some monetary issues and spending issues and foreign policy issues. It's been a disaster for decades, and it just took us a long time to get to this point. It was predictable that this would happen, especially when we changed our economic policies and our monetary policies in the 1970s. But now we've reached this point where we can no longer sustain it because we've undermined our production in this country. We've chased all the good jobs overseas. The standard of living is going down, especially for the middle class. And we're now starting to see what happens typically in a system where you devalue and destroy the currency. And we're in the process of doing that. And there's a characteristic that always happens, and that is the destruction of the middle class. And now we're seeing the transfer of the wealth from the middle class and the poor to the very wealthy. And this is the reason that there is so much anger, there's so many people upset. They expect the government, they expected way too much from the government. They thought the government could take care of us from cradle to grave, which is an impossibility. And we have forgotten about the original intent of the Constitution. The Constitution was written not to allow the government to assume this role of policing the world, running your life, and redistributing wealth in the economic system. The Constitution was written mainly to restrain the federal government. It's because we've lost that, and there's been no restraint on the federal government and the Federal Reserve, that we've gotten ourselves into this big mess.
Right.
And it took a while to do that. I first got interested in economic policies in the 1960s, and I came across the Austrian Free Market School of Economics, and they made predictions that this pseudo-gold standard that we had after World War II would not last, and it did break down. Although it restrained the government a little bit. It was in 1971 where we had to give up our linkage to our currency to gold, which ushered in an age of unlimited spending. Because if governments couldn't spend, if governments were limited to the money they had to collect, then they couldn't overspend. Today, we have gone one step further. We overtaxed. We couldn't tax anymore. Then we overborrowed. We couldn't borrow anymore because interest rates started to go up. And then we resorted to this invention that's been around for a long, long time called inflation. Just turn it over to the authorities. In our case, it's the Federal Reserve. Turn it over to the authority, the Federal Reserve, and say, you buy our debt. You be the lender and the spender of last resort. And it sounded like a great idea, and it seemed to work for a while. But it turned around on us. What really happened was all this interest that was designed to take care and make sure everybody had a house and free education and free medical care. It turned around, instead of helping the people who were supposed to help, it really was really the vehicle that took care of the very wealthy. This is why we can't ignore the issue of monetary policy in the Federal Reserve. And the first place to start to find out exactly what's been going on for all these decades is to get a full audit of exactly what the Federal Reserve is. I believe if we had a full audit of the Federal Reserve, we would go to the next step and we'd start looking for sound money. And we don't have to look terribly far because our founders of this country understood this issue very, very well, because they abused the currency. They had runaway inflation with the continental dollar, and therefore they put into the Constitution no paper money, and only gold and silver could be used as legal tender. That has never been repealed, so it's just another example how we ignore the rule of law, and we just do what by saying government has done, and we have allowed, the people have allowed the government just to spend for any reason that they wanted, thinking, well, it's always for good reason, they'll take good care of us. But it introduced the idea of an unlimited welfare state, which we have now, and now we can't meet our responsibilities. The poor people who were supposed to be able to get a house, they've lost their jobs and their houses. The poor people who were supposed to get medical care, they are on the tail end of receiving that medical care. And the educational system was taken over by the federal government, which I strongly disapprove of. They took it over. The quality of education has crashed. And guess what? The students are graduating. We have more students graduating. But they now owe $1 trillion. They owe more money than all the credit card debt in this country. So it doesn't work. And this is what people are waking up to. And then there are just a few in this country who are sick and tired of all these wars we're fighting.
Yeah.
Years, inflation, that is the destruction of currency, has been used to fight wars. Even before they invented the entitlement system in the welfare state, wars have been used for various reasons, for this idea that countries think they have to have an empire to conquer others and tell others what to do. And it's sort of a nature of some individuals rather than being comfortable with just protecting their own freedoms. But they resorted in the old days to clipping coins. They would shave the coins and make the coins smaller, and therefore people finally found that they need more coins and prices would go up. Later on, they learned how to dilute the metal. Instead of having an ounce of gold in a coin, they would have less than an ounce of coin. That is inflation. It's trying to stretch the money, but the people always figure it out. Not immediately, but they figure it out later. Then there have been many societies who just said, oh, we need money, we'll print the money. And that wasn't as difficult to identify, even though as recently as Zimbabwe, they printed money. Mexico has printed money in the past. Germany essentially printed money in the 20s and brought on chaos, and not only economic chaos, but political chaos. Now it's so much more sophisticated and harder to detect. They just use a computer. The Federal Reserve can create trillions of dollars on their own without consent of the people or the Congress, and they can pass the money out to all the special interests. That's exactly what they've been doing for decades. Their friends on Wall Street and in the big banking system got into trouble. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. So what happened? The Congress went along with it. They passed TARP funds to bail out the special interests, the rich corporations and the banks. But where the big bailout occurred was in the Federal Reserve System. We didn't get our audit, but we got a partial audit last year, and we found out that the Congress hardly spends anything in comparison to what the Fed does. The Fed has extended $15 trillion worth of credit to certain banks. A third of that credit went to foreign banks. And this is not done under the rule of law. The whole monetary system is unconstitutional. Do they ever come to the Congress? No. Does the Congress even know what's going on? No. Does the Congress demand an audit? The Congress created the Fed. They have the authority to demand and restrain the Fed. They do nothing because over the many years it seemed like the Federal Reserve was a friend of the people and friend of the business people and a friend of the economy. And on the short run, that seems to be the case. But ultimately, when you disturb and disrupt the economy and you disrupt the signals that come from market interest rates, what you do is you end up creating financial bubbles. First it was the NASDAQ bubble that collapsed. Then it was the housing bubble. Now we have a bond bubble and a dollar bubble, and that's yet to collapse. But we've been in the real doldrums since the year 2000. We have not created any significant new manufacturing jobs in all this time. The jobs are leaving us because we have undermined the conditions where we thrive. It's difficult for businesses to get started. It's easier to start a business in China. Here we thought we had to go to war with China 40, 50 years ago because they were the communists and we were the good capitalists. And now we are the welfareists that are flat out broke. We're the biggest debtor nation in the history of the world. And guess what? China has more money than anybody else in the world. And we have to borrow from them. So every time we want something, or the people want something, and say, give us this, give us that, and literally that money has to come from China. And we're dependent on them to continue to loan us money, trillions of dollars. They have like $3 trillion in their bank, and we owe that much to the various countries around the world. Many, many trillions of dollars. So on the short run, it seemed to help. But since the year 2000, it has dawned on the world that we no longer are producing. And we did produce, and we lived well, and we were the most prosperous in the world, and we had the maximum amount of freedom. Now we are less free and less prosperous. We now are not producing the goods, and yet we haven't curtailed any spending. It's like saying if an individual or a family or a business is deep in debt, and they are told, well, what you need to do is borrow more money. You need to spend more money to stimulate your own economy. But what if you're broke? What if you're maxed out? And what if you don't have a job? And then the people say you need to spend more money. Well, it doesn't work. Most people understand it on a personal level, and they know that they either have to declare bankruptcy to get out from under it all, or they have to quit spending, or they have to work harder and take 2 jobs and live in a smaller house or whatever until they pay off the debt before they can get their growth back again. But the countries don't like that idea because it's not politically correct to say that we shouldn't keep spending money when the country is in trouble. And so what has happened is we keep spending, we keep borrowing, we keep printing money, and we keep getting poorer. And we keep undermining the conditions that are necessary to produce the jobs. So we're in this terrible fix. So this is the reason why I emphasize the spending. There's a lot of talks about what kind of tax code do we have, what we should have here, sales taxes and flat taxes and corporate taxes. That's all very, very important. Of course, I have a simple solution to that, because if we truly had a constitutional government, guess what? We would have 0, 0, 0 is what we would have.
Yeah.